Welcome back. India and Canada have taken the first steps to reset their strained relationship. Both nations have agreed to appoint high commissioners to each other's capitals. The big breakthrough came after Prime Minister Narendra Modi met Prime Minister Mark Carney on the sidelines of the G7 summit. The move comes nearly 2 years after the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, alleged India's involvement in the killing of Sikh separatist Hardeep Singh Nijjar in 2023. Ties came to a complete standstill last year after Ottawa linked India's high commissioners and other diplomats to the murder. India also temporarily suspended some visa services for Canadians. Fast forward to 2025. Carney took over as Prime Minister and later extended an invitation to India for the G7 summit, although at the 11th hour. He said India needs to be a part of the important discussions. Prime Minister Modi accepted. During their meeting, the leaders reaffirmed the importance of bilateral ties and also discussed restarting the stalled negotiations on the early progress trade agreement. They discussed collaboration in areas such as clean energy, digital transformation, artificial intelligence, critical minerals, and also higher education as well. Now, let's understand why it is important to strengthen India-Canada ties. Trade between the two countries rose by 3.2% in FY25 to $8.6 billion. India's exports to Canada were worth $4.2 billion, while imports from Canada were $4.4 billion. India exports pharmaceutical products, auto parts, electronic goods, jewelry, among others, to Canada, while India imports minerals, pulses, iron and aluminium, scrap and paper. Improving ties could help Canada reduce its dependence on the United States. India is also a favorable investment destination for Canada. Canadian portfolio investments in India, particularly through pension funds, are estimated at more than $73 billion. At least 600 companies have a presence in India, while 1,000 are actively pursuing business interests in the India market. Indian companies are also active in the IT, financial services and the health sciences sector in Canada. Canada is also home to one of the largest Indian diaspora abroad, with 1.8 million Indo-Canadians, 1 million NRIs as of 31st December last year. Over 3.9 lakh students are studying in Canada as well. To discuss what the reset in ties means for both countries, joining us on the show is strategic affairs expert Brahma Chellaney. Mr. Chellaney, thank you very much for joining us on Global Lens. Give us a sense of what made both leaders come together and decide that let's resume the diplomatic and bilateral relationship.
India has always been invited to the G7 summits since 2019 in recognition of India's rising international profile, its growing geopolitical weight. So India was expecting an invite from Canada, which came at the 11th hour, about 9 or 10 days before the summit in Alberta. But for the Canadian Prime Minister, Carney, the decision to invite Modi was a very careful decision, a decision for which he received a lot of criticism at home. But it was an important decision that he took because largely due to the stagnating economy of Canada. Carney won the election in April on the promise to restore the momentum in Canadian economy. So one of the first tasks he has sought to achieve is to reset Canada's strained relations with China and India, the two giants. Carney is looking at how other G7 countries, like, for example, the UK recently signed a free trade agreement with India, and he understands that Canada needs India much more than India needs Canada. So his motivation was largely economic, because without access to the large Indian market, Canada's economy cannot be revived. For India, accepting the invite was actually a given, because India has been, Prime Minister Modi has attended all these other G7 summits. But once Modi agreed to Carney's invitation, then it became incumbent on both sides to achieve some diplomatic breakthrough on their strained relationship.
Right. What do you think was the decision that they took behind closed doors on the assassination of the Sikh separatist Hardeep Singh Nijjar? Now, that was a major thorn in ties between the two countries. Canada was blaming Indian government officials for direct involvement. Do you think both the nations have managed to put that aside?
Nijjar's killing was the consequence of a deeply rooted problem in Canada-India relations that goes back to the first half of the 1980s, when Canada became a major stronghold of violent Khalistanis. That in turn led to the 1985 twin Air India bombings. Two separate Air India jetliners were bombed in 1985. In one bombing, all 329 people on board were killed. And the man, two Canadian inquiries identified as the mastermind of the twin bombings, Talvinder Parmar, was the guy that Canada's then Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau, shielded. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi at that time had actually sought the extradition of Talvinder Parmar, but Pierre Trudeau rejected the Indian request. Today, not only is Canada a hub of violent Khalistanis, it's become the global epicenter of the militant movement for Khalistan. So that has been the root cause of the strain in Canada-India relations. And of course, we know nothing about what the two leaders discussed in terms of Canada doing its part to rein in the Khalistanis, because they've agreed to restore the high commissioners who were kicked out. But as India said at that time, that Indian diplomats are unable to function freely in Canada because of threats to their physical safety. So did Canada assure India in the Carney-Modi meeting that it will take action against those that threaten the safety, the lives of Indian diplomats? We should not forget that in the run-up to the diplomatic row between Canada and India, Khalistanis in Canada were erecting billboards, public billboards, advocating the killing of Indian diplomats who were identified with photos on billboards. These same Khalistanis were honoring jailed or killed terrorists as martyrs. They were staging parade floats in Canada on which the assassination of Indira Gandhi was reenacted. And they even staged attacks on Indian diplomatic missions in Canada. So given that background, the return of high commissioners by itself doesn't mean much, especially if the Indian High Commissioner in Ottawa is not able to function freely. So we would like to know as to what assurances Canada provided to India. But I'm sure that the two sides have agreed, as their statements show, that and the language is fairly similar except for small differences. Both sides have agreed to revive the relationship based on mutual respect and respect for the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Right. Do you also feel, and you made that important point, that the Canada economy is slowing down? They need economies like India. They need a trade deal with India. And that statement that was issued by the Indian government also mentioned that both sides will resume work on the early progress trade agreement. Before the ties went down all the way to an all-time low in 2023, we were working on an early trade deal and that would have been signed. But do you feel that, considering that both sides are now going to resume work on the trade deal and it's been put in black and white, means that we can expect progress and both nations have put economic ties before other political issues, more difficult political issues?
Not really. In fact, the reference to the early progress trade agreement, EPTA, as well as the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, is only found in the Indian readout. The Canadian readout doesn't mention that. The fact is that Canada is emphasizing the economic aspects. India wants Canada, on the other hand, to address the security and political issues. Obviously, the economic forward movement will depend on what Canada does in terms of addressing India's concerns about Canada becoming a global hub of the Khalistanis. But clearly, the fact that Canada and India traditionally have been friendly democracies. These are two large democracies in the world, or important democracies in the world, and it makes sense for Canada and India to restore their relationship, to rebuild the damaged ties. But this will take time because it's easier to damage a relationship than to rebuild it. And I think what we have seen so far in terms of the Carney-Modi meeting is the first step, a first step toward rebuilding a relationship. This relationship holds a lot of promise, and hopefully the two leaders, Carney and Modi, have set the direction for further engagement, for further discussions to rebuild this important relationship.
Mr. Chellaney, thank you so much for joining us. Indeed, a very important relationship. Let's see how things proceed. Moving on, Prime Minister